Here comes the spin.
Told the story today, real bottom line story. I managed to call into a radio station a while back, and they said anyone who knows the answer to this question, feel free to call in. And I called it in a flash because I knew the answer to the question. Question was, what was the first thing excuse me, that Sherlock Holmes said to Dr. Watson? And I remembered right off the top of my head, I just said, "Oh yeah, you have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." Now, if you think about what happens in the next couple of minutes as I explain this to you, the first thing that happened was I called the radio station, and the gentleman answered the phone, and I said, without even saying hello, I just said, "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." And the guy was totally floored that I knew that, and he really was surprised somebody would know that. Back then there was really no movies that talked about what the first thing that he said. You had to have read the book. But think about the way that worked. I said to the gentleman on the phone, "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." His first answer was, "How did you know that?" And if you think about it, that was the first thing that Watson said to Holmes. Holmes said, "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." And Watson said, "How did you know that?" So when I called the radio station and the person on the other end answered, he said, "How did you know that?" Well, I knew it because I had read the book, but the bottom line is Sherlock Holmes had read Watson like a book because he used deductive reasoning to be able to understand that he had been in Afghanistan. Now, at that point in time, you start saying, what is deductive reasoning? Well, deductive reasoning is taking something where it is and walking it backwards. How did we arrive at this point? What did we have to do? And that's exactly how communication comes into line, right? You have to make sure that when you communicate with somebody, that you allow them a good opportunity so they can understand you. Stephen Covey talks about 7 habits of highly effective people. Seek first to understand, then worry about being understood. Exactly. Understand. Holmes looked at Watson and he wanted to understand where the man came from, what the man was all about, so he can tell him and surprise him or whatever his intention was that you have been in this place. I understand that. He told him right off top, "I perceive," which means I understand. So therefore, that's communication right there. He told him right where he thought he was. It's kind of like somebody comes over your house or somebody's just got done mowing the lawn. "Boy, you look like you could use a nice cold drink." Yeah, because you understand where that person has been, and now you understand what that person could be looking for, what that person could be needing. Now, the next step is, how is he going to understand you? Well, I'm going to let you know there's a couple options. You can have a beer, you can have a soda, you can have some water. What would you like? Now the person can understand you, what you're offering. It's the same way in sales, it's the same way in life. It's the best way to communicate. Always seek first to understand, then worry about being understood. It's that simple. One way in which you can approach just a presentation, you should always outline first what you're going to talk about what you outlined, and then open it up to questions. Another thing too with communication works this way too. Always ask permission when you can to stop talking about a certain subject if they're not interested. I've heard this before too. You can go another step further. You could offer to the person, "Hey, if you're not interested, let me know." You at the same time can say, "Look it, if I think you're not interested, I'm going to let you know and I'm going to stop." Okay? Now, You've totally laid down the ground rules. You've opened up all the communication you possibly can. And at the same time, you're seeking first to understand. Always be ahead of that. Always look to understand before you try or make an attempt to be understood. Go to the doctor's office, right? Where does it hurt? What part of your body? What's going on? He's trying to understand why in the heck you're there. Sometimes you just come right out and say, what brings you to the doctor today? Then they ask even more questions. How long has it hurt? What's the situation, right? This is all ways in which we can learn how to communicate better. Asking questions. This just doesn't relate to one-on-one, seeing people face to face. Maybe just asking a question, through a text or an email or on the phone. Asking questions to get feedback. The feedback is going to be in a much more raw form, of course, when you're not in front of the person, because we all know that 85% of the way we communicate is body language. But at the same time, you could start to understand more about it and more about the situation based on the answers you get from your questions. It's always a challenge to get yourself in that mindset. And the other thing, too, which happens a lot, is credibility. Credibility is something that's incredibly hard to develop. Okay, we talked about the 5 abilities last time. I'll go through them real quick. Accountability, responsibility, stickability, compatibility, and of course, credibility. Here's a question I can ask you. And when you think about this, you will know the circle of people you're hanging around with and what kind of credibility they have. Picture this: knock at the door, your friend with the credibility that you believe you have comes over. Person with them, okay, the person with them has a gun in their hand. Person points the gun at you. Your friend says, "Don't worry, Joe. Don't worry, whatever your name is, Sam, Samantha, whatever. There's no bullets in the gun. Don't worry about it." Now, that's the question. Credibility you believe you have with that person, is it strong enough where you would believe what they said and not worry about any bullets in the gun? Person said there's no bullets in the gun, you trust them. That's it. Go one step further, person pulls the trigger, obviously nothing happens because there's no bullets in the gun. Well, that's one way of testing your credibility with that person, right? Flip it on the other side. Would that person feel the same credibility if you were to tell them there's no bullets in the gun? And you turn the tables and you wind up in a situation where you're now relying on them to tell you the truth. That's credibility. The other credibility really comes down to this: how many people do you have that you would trust in that situation? If you have 4 or 5, you are definitely a blessed person. Matter of fact, I was in a business once, and if you did have 4 or 5 of those people, you probably were able to build yourself into a multi-million-dollar business. Why? Because you set the cornerstones for credibility. You set the guidelines. If you bring people in that you could trust that much, you got yourself a team. You got yourself a relationship. You got yourself something to build on. That is an incredible thing. No bullets in the gun, I promise you. Person's got to stand there and believe you. And he doesn't know the other person. That's the key. Don't know the other person. He's got a gun, but my friend tells me there's no bullets in it. He's not just your friend. He's basically the other part of you. You're trusting him. You're putting your life in his hands. But if you got people that you surround yourself with where you would put your life in your hands and they would do the same for you, you got yourself a life. you got yourself some incredible, incredible foundation of friends. It's an incredible, incredible concept. And the other thing, too, we talked about it last time, was responsibility. Responsibility comes after accountability, right? Accountability is probably one of the harder things to do because we talked about earlier with Bill. Talk about self discipline. If you're going to hold yourself accountable, that is a big challenge because most people, I've heard this before, basically they give the good old boy a break or the good old girl a break. They say, well, so what? You didn't get all that done. Don't worry about it this time. I know you didn't try hardest, but don't worry about it. We'll get it another time. No, accountability says, I didn't get it. I'm sick about it. But the next time I go out and do it, darn well, be sure I'm going to be able to do it the next time. I'm going to do it the next time. I'm going to try very hard the next time. I'm going to give it my all. Or you tell yourself you're going to give it your all and you're going to do it right this time. And you're going to not give up until you're done. You see, they talk about that as far as keeping yourself accountable, but it all ties together. Because if you can be that way and hold yourself accountable, now all of a sudden your ability to respond is tremendous. You do have responsibility and you are a good, responsible person. And the last one is to hold to your actual convictions. Hold to them no matter what happens. That's all part of stickability. We talked about that. We reviewed it last time, but it's always worth reviewing again because credibility is right at the end of that. How did you build the credibility? We talked about this too, as far as understanding people and understanding yourself. Well, I told you last time one of the better ways to do that is really to decide exactly why you're doing things. Why are you doing things? Ask yourself 4 times, why? What time did you get up this morning? Why? And then whatever the answer is, ask yourself another why. To go to work. Why? Because I had to go make money. Why? Because I needed to pay my bills. Why? Why was it important to pay your bills? And then you go through the whole process and you come down to the essence of yourself. And hopefully at that point in time, you can motivate yourself because you have a whole armful, if you will, of reasons why you're going to make a tremendous effort on your day. I hope I helped you today, and I hope that gives you a good idea going forward. And we'll catch you next time on the next Spinato Spin. I think we're pretty much done here, Bruce.